Chapter 4 Dying in the Snow. It had now been 6 months since I was first arrested for the murder of Amy Pilford. The grand jury had indicted me on all counts, and this was going to be a death penalty case. My court-appointed lawyer was nothing more than a pimple-faced geek just out of law school. He was a good guy, but didn't have the experience to try a case like this one. I sure wasn't a rich man, and so little James Atwater was to be my guy. Another problem was the fact that I was barely unable to understand all that was being said about me. I had not finished school, and even when I was there, I had never paid that much attention to my lessons. I could barely read, and so James had to read everything to me. In the end, my trial would come down to two things. The one witness, Sam Baker at the store, who saw me there at the time that Miss Pilford was there, and, secondly, what the town knew of me. I would be 21 years old, and they would try to take my life. I could not even remember if I had killed her or not. That was the bitch of it all. The only thing I could remember was her smile. She had a lovely smile. I still couldn't remember what happened that night. I knew that I was going to be convicted, and that they were going to sentence me to death. I had to create the lie in order to tell myself and get myself to believe it, so I would be able to believe that my sentence of death was deserved. I knew that if I dwelled on the fact that I was an innocent man about to die for a crime I didn't commit, it would drive me insane. Yes, I was a doper and a thief, but I never killed anyone. I was not a rich man or an educated man, but I knew the little town needed its monster, and I was the monster they looked at. Somebody had to pay for Amy Pilford so the residents of the community could lie to one another and say that they are safe again once I was convicted. Sure, there still was a killer out there, but an unknown killer is too terrifying to admit. Everyone could sleep a little better once all this was behind them. Lies are like warm blankets out in the middle of a blizzard. Sure, they'll keep you warm for a little while, but in a blizzard, even your blanket will not keep you from freezing to death, trapped out in all that fear and bitterness. Amy Pilford was a beautiful human being that had not deserved the fate handed out to her on that cold November night. All her dreams had been taken from her, and that wasn't fair. But was it more fair to blame an innocent man for something that he had not done, even though it made everyone feel better? We all lied to each other. That was the only way we could still look at each other in the daylight. Our lies spun in the face of truth and justice. This was not my first lie that I had told myself, and over the years to come, it would not be the last. My trial was to begin in March. The only defense my attorney came up with was that there was no evidence discovered on my person and my previous criminal history. "You're not a violent offender," James said as we sat in the jail across from one another at a table. "I know that." "There is no physical evidence or a murder weapon." "That's pretty good," James said with a big goofy grin. "I'm a scapegoat," I said sternly as my eyes grew steely. "What about a plea deal?" The smile on James's young face faded as he moved in his chair. "They're seeking the death penalty, man. This is not about justice. This is about revenge." That was the truth of the situation. Revenge. Somebody had to pay for this horrible crime. Even though I could not remember what had transpired that night, I knew that I was already guilty. I was guilty because I was poor and uneducated. I was guilty because I was a throwaway person. This is the one fact that I had learned all my life. Niggers, peckerwoods, wetbacks, we're all the same. Justice is blind. That's a hoot. There are two worlds out there when it comes to the American justice system. There's the court for the rich and the court for the poor. America is the land of the free, but they have more people incarcerated, more than any other country in the world. It's big business. There's money to be made for counties, states, and the federal government. Court costs, attorney fees, bail bonds, probation, recidivism. It's all about cold hard cash. There is another ism for you, recidivism. Recidivism is one of the most fundamental concepts in criminal justice. It refers to a person's relapse into criminal behavior, often after the person receives sanction or undergoes intervention for a previous crime. That's the key. You get that record, and then you're basically screwed. When I got out of jail for the first time, I was on parole and I had to pay all these fines. I couldn't get a job, so I couldn't pay my fees. And around we went. Society will say to me that I made my own choices. I now have to pay for my decisions. Okay, but shit, how long do I have to pay? Is there ever an end to all of this? When do I get my vengeance? Who can I blame for all my bad luck? Do I blame my mom for getting knocked up? Do I blame my father for being a lowlife? How about this? Can I blame those fucking woods that so terrified me when I was a child? Is that the answer? One day I found safety and love in those woods, and then I was betrayed and something was broken inside my mind and heart. That was my world, and it lied to me. First it said, come on in, look around, see the sights. Then when I had become very comfortable and warm, it was all taken away, and I was slapped in the face, and the world yelled in my face. It said, wake up, kid. This is real life. It's not a fairy tale or fantasy. The real world is fucked up, and it will do its best to skin you alive. So here I am sitting in a cell in the basement of the courthouse on the first day of my trial. I'm dressed in a cheap suit that my mom bought me at the Five and Dime. It's too big on me. It still smells of Old Spice the old man that owned it for 20 years wore every day until he died and it was donated to the Goodwill. In a few moments they will come and get me and take me upstairs where everyone will stare at the monster who walked among them. I'd seen the local paper. They always use all three of your names when you're a monster. They use all three because the monster needs a name. If the monster has a name, the people gain a false sense of security. I'm not just a boogeyman lurking in the woods. I'm Thomas Allen Anderson. The monster has a name, he has a face, and they can see me and point me out and say, there it is, that's evil. In the end, it is always a letdown to tell you the truth. In my old, too big for me suit, I will not appear as a monster. In the movies, there's always the big reveal. The monster is always deformed or animal-like. I'm neither. That is why movies make the monster deformed or animal-like, because the real truth is far more terrifying. Monsters aren't supposed to look like the boy next door. Where are my horns? Where are my fangs? The real evil lies inside, all hidden and secretive. Inside my soul was a wooded, dark place where there was a man that stared out from the trees and watched the world and waited. He waited for me to come to him. I think that there is really only one moment that stands out in my mind most vividly from my trial. It was just after Todd, Amy's husband, had testified. His recount of their life together and how they met was indeed heartbreaking. It was then that the DA pulled down the screen that hung on the wall and set up the old projector that flashed the first picture. It was a black and white photo of Amy's face protruding up from the snow. You could clearly see that her front teeth were broken out of her mouth, and you could see those black doll eyes of hers. Until that moment, I had never really appreciated black and white photography. In later years, I would become a huge fan of photographers like Ansel Adams, but at that moment, I was ignorant to any of it. Only in black and white does the world seem the most real. It brings out the truth and hides nothing. It lays you naked in front of the eyes of the world and presents the real truth of the situation. With color pictures, we get all distracted by the rainbow of different colors and hues. Black and white grabs you by your throat and pushes reality in your face, and it screams, "Look at it, motherfucker!" It was real. She was dead. D.A. Burr put up a side-by-side comparison. One picture was a recent photo in color of Amy in her nursing uniform with that lovely smile and those sparkling eyes. The other was her from just above her breast lying on that flat autopsy table. Burr turned and looked at me and then at the jury. A young, vivacious woman in the prime of her life. A newlywed wanting to start a family with her new husband. A young student who dreamed of helping others, like she had always helped her disabled sister. Now this is what was left after he had taken what he wanted. He left her torn, broken, nude body in the snow. He discarded her like a piece of trash. After he stabbed her 9 times, he stood up, he zipped up his pants, and he walked back to his warm car and left. He left Amy Pilford nude, broken, alone, and freezing to die in the snow. Imagine that. We pray that she was already dead. But what if she wasn't? Close your eyes and see her lying there, nude, the cold stinging her body, stabbed 9 times trying to breathe, terrified, so desperate for someone to come and save her. With each breath, her lungs burning in the cold air, burning from the pain of the knife wounds. Her lips could only tremble as she desperately tried to call for help. Only the trees heard her cries. Each breath harder to take, each moment more bitter, alone and freezing, dying in the snow. When Burr had finished with his dramatic description of Amy's last dying moment, I looked at the jury. All of their eyes were on me. They then all turned away in unison, and they never looked at me again. In that moment, that one moment in all my life, I never felt lower. It's a hard question to have to ask yourself. Am I really capable of doing something like this? And to have others look at you in shock as they try to imagine in their own fragile minds that horrible moment. Each member of that jury placed themselves in Amy's position when they had looked at me. The women imagined themselves at my mercy, looking up at my dirty, slobbering face as I lingered above them like some ethereal fog. The men imagined Amy being their wife or their daughter and seeing me face to face in a room without windows and what they would do to me if left alone for a little while. In a small country town, all that was horrible enough, but then to imagine the rape, that intrusive violation. But it was the act of sodomy that really sealed the case. In their minds, I was a sodomite that should be cast down into the lake of burning sulfur. I was one of those people from Sodom and Gomorrah that God destroyed because of my intense wickedness. It's all so hypocritical. On Sunday morning, it's all hellfire and damnation. But on Friday night, a little tickle in the tush is just good fun. D.A. Byrd had dramatically detailed Amy's last dying moment. But when it had come to the rape and that act of sodomy, I was sure they were about to lynch me on the spot. Even though everything he said was speculation, to the jury, it was like God's finger pointing at me. He raped her vaginally was not enough for this sick man, Burr said as he pointed at me from across the room. He then raped her anally. There was a gasp from the gallery. The coroner's report showed that Amy suffered from anal tears. This was a brutal, violating act. She had already endured that hit to the mouth that had broken out both of her front teeth at the gum line. She had endured the vaginal rape. But as he began the new assault, the pain must have been overwhelming for her. Amy was a small woman, no more than 112 pounds. But when he jammed his penis into her anus, he did it with such malice that he ripped her. She began to bleed. The pain had to be excruciating. This was not lovemaking. This was brutality. She tried to force him off of her, and that is when she scratched him and enraged the defendant. He took out his knife from his belt and began to stab her. Semen was discovered in her anal cavity. He was still raping her as he was stabbing her. Not only was she subjected to the pain of the anal rape, but now she was being stabbed over and over again in her chest. But did this sway the defendant? Cause him to feel pity for her? No. This sexual demon was excited by this. Excited to the point of ejaculation as he was stabbing her to death. Young little James objected. My client has no history of sexual crime or deviancy in his history. Overruled. This was porn. This was filth, and the town was going to revel in it like some pig does his slop. It was our very own seedy little scandal and imaginable soap opera. This was years of repression coming out in the court. It was sickening and real, and deep inside, it was all a little deviant. In the big city, a crime like this is commonplace. It is horrible, but it is normal, and I'm sorry to say that. But in a small town, there are many secrets, whispers on every street corner. There is perversion, molestation, but it is all hushed up and covered up by the power of the pulpit. Sin, sin, hell, hell. It is known but unknown. Amy was a pretty girl, and probably half the guys in the court and a few on the jury had imagined fucking her at least once. A few were probably going to spank it tonight after all this titillation. This was the purge. It was the ability of the town to take all its sins and place them on my shoulders. I was to be their sacrifice. It was perfect. The jury came back in 22 minutes. 1,320 seconds. I often think about those 22 minutes. If the average person lives to be 80, that is 42,048,000 minutes. Out of all these minutes in a lifetime, can you remember the most life-changing minutes of your life? I was 21 years old, and I remember each of those 22 minutes. On many nights in prison when I couldn't sleep, I would count those seconds, 1,320 seconds over and over again. In 22 minutes, a jury of men and women summed up my entire life up to the point and decided that I needed to die. Those 22 minutes were the most surreal minutes of my life. While sitting on death row, I have learned a lot about the number 22. The atomic number of titanium is 22. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 paths in the Kabbalistic tree of life. In traditional tarot decks, there are 22 cards with allegorical subjects. But there is one example of 22 that I would discover in later years that caused me to feel as if all this had happened for a reason. It was not just a chance occurrence. This was destiny. In many years to come, beyond those 22 minutes, I would read a book by Joseph Heller entitled Catch-22. As I read this book, I was fascinated by the paradox of the Catch-22, as it is referred to as a type of unsolvable logic puzzle, sometimes called a double blind. What really fascinated me was one example that I discovered which related to the double blind or Catch-22 to a child abuser abusing a child. The child abuser will say, "You should have escaped me. Now it's too late, because now nobody will believe that you didn't want what I have done to you." I associated that example with my own life. My fear grew in the forest behind my house. In those trees is where all my insecurities, fears, and doubts originated. I should have escaped them. I should have left this town, but I stayed. I stayed, and now nobody believes that I didn't want what was done to me. I was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death plus 150 years. At that moment, I had not been shocked by the sentence. I had been expecting it. There was applause from the gallery, and I think I heard my mother crying. But in that moment, all my young mind was trying to come to grips was what the death penalty really meant. I, unlike the rest of you, would someday know the exact hour I was to die. I have often heard others ask one another the question that if they could know the day, would they want to know that day? Most say no, but I would say yes. There is freedom in knowing. There were so many things that I would miss out on. I would never make love to a woman again. I would never have a family Christmas. I would never get the chance to be a father. I think the idea of 150 years in prison scared me more than dying. I thought of William Blake's poem, "A robin redbreast in a cage puts all of heaven in a rage." This is how I felt, like I was being thrown into the system that oppresses the poor and does not allow any possibility of becoming free. But unlike all the other poor souls that surrounded me, I would someday regain my freedom. In death, I would be set free. On that day, many would curse my name and desire my soul to burn. But as I ride the lightning, I would explode up beyond the reach of the angry masses and soar like a comet through the blue oblivion. Someday I would again be free.